Hello, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the evening of January 10th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of January 11th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, reports came out from Qatar today that Qatar has put forth a deal in which a truce and IDF withdrawal will begin, followed by a ceasefire that will include hostage release in exchange for Palestinian prisoners' release, and then finally a complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in exchange for an exile of the Hamas leadership. Responding to these claims, Hamas denied that any such deal exists and called it a Zionist ploy, and in Israel, the head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea, also reported that he spoke to the Qatari Prime Minister to ask for clarification, as Israel also is not clear about the parameters of this plan. There's suspicion reported in Israel that Qatar is using this as a tactic to just reinsert itself back into negotiations as it is under heavy pressure from the United States to reignite the deals. Osama Hamdan, who's a Hamas representative in Lebanon, stated that any suggestion of demilitarizing the organization is naive and unrealistic, and any talks about exile is an illusion. Ismail Haniyeh, who's the former leader of Hamas, who lives in Qatar, stated, and I'm quoting, "They, meaning Israel, will never get their hostages back unless all of our prisoners are released from the occupation's jails." One of the reasons, I will add, that in Israel there's suspicion about this deal is because it is unclear at this point who is actually controlling Hamas. Theoretically, this deal was presented to Hamas leadership abroad. However, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, is right now one calling the shots and deciding if there actually can be a deal. So Israel is very suspicious of this. Amidst this, another Israeli delegation arrived in Egypt today to continue talks about reviving the negotiations. Al Arabi Al Jadid reported that Egypt is trying to restart the negotiations from where they were frozen after the assassination of Salah al-Aruri last week, and that Israel is emphasizing that any stop in the war will only be framed as a temporary truce, whereas Hamas is saying that the negotiations can only be restarted if the basic premise is that it will be a complete ceasefire, and only after that will there be a hostage exchange. Moving on to the fighting in the Gaza Strip, this was one of the quietest days with regards to rockets and mortars being fired from the Gaza Strip. Only one rocket was launched from the Gaza Strip, targeting the area of Nahal Oz. Regarding the fighting within the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Strip, in the Saja'iyah neighborhood, the IDF is completing what it is calling a flattening operation of the eastern parts of the neighborhood that overlook the Israeli kibbutzim of Nahal Oz and Kfar Aza. Similar operations are being carried out in the northern parts of Beit Hanun and in the areas between Beit Hanun and Saja'iyah. According to reports, this involves razing to the ground of thousands of houses and buildings that are being detonated and destroyed as they overlook these areas in Israel and were used by Hamas as sites for rocket launching, lookout posts, and sniping activity into Israel. The IDF reported that each structure that is destroyed is inspected and found to be and confirmed that it is a Hamas military target. The IDF also put out aerial shots showing the devastation in the Saja'iyah neighborhood. Moving on to the central parts of the Gaza Strip, in the El Maghazi refugee camp, there was substantial IDF activity reported, with bombing from the air and sea as well. Over 15 tunnel entrances were discovered in the last 24 hours, and a rocket manufacturing site was dismantled. In the El Bureid refugee site, the IDF published pictures of units raiding luxury homes of Marwan Issa, who is the deputy leader of Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades. The IDF also put out statements emphasizing the disparity between the luxury homes, including pools and lavish gardens of different Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip, compared to the population. In Deir al-Balach, there was reporting of substantial bombings in the last 24 hours. 4 members of the Palestinian Red Crescent were reportedly killed in one of the attacks. Moving on to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Han Yunis, in raids against homes of terror activists, which, again, amidst the ICJ case that is being debated tomorrow, the IDF emphasized that the raids against the homes of different terror activists were military targets. Long-range weapons and RPGs were located underneath children's beds. In addition, the IDF published images of tunnel entrances in schoolyards and a launching site that was found behind a kindergarten. In the northern parts of the city, the IDF located a tunnel and found evidence that hostages were being kept in it in very dire conditions. Likely, according to reports, these were hostages that were taken there on October 7th and were since released in the truce that happened in November. Moving further south and east to Khirbat Khuzaa, which is the area on the most southern eastern part of the Gaza Strip that is 1 kilometer away from the border with Israel, the IDF reported it completed taking over the area, destroying hundreds of different Hamas terror infrastructures, including different launching sites, lookout posts, and over 40 tunnel entrances in these areas. There are also reports that the IDF is planning similar flattening operations in the northern parts of Khirbat Khuzaa, since yet again, like in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, this overlooks Israeli kibbutzim surrounding the Gaza Strip. Moving on to some more news from the Gaza Strip. After I reported several days ago that an attack was carried out against the car in Rafah, and this fits the profile of what are usually more assassination types rather than the regular bombings that the IDF carries out, reports came out that 2 journalists, Hamza el-Dahdouh as well as Mustafa Tharia, were killed in that attack. This came under heavy condemnation by a lot of different media outlets in the world. IDF spokesperson today stated that the military has proof that Theria was an operative in Hamas's Gaza City division and that Dardouh was a member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's engineering units. According to the IDF, prior to their deaths, both were operating drones in the area in a way that was endangering IDF soldiers. Other news, the IDF reported that it carried out over 150 bombings throughout the Gaza Strip. In other news, Al-Akhbar, which is a news outlet affiliated with Hezbollah in Lebanon, reported today that Israel informed Egypt of its desire to work against tunnels along the Philadelphia line, that is the border between Gaza and Egypt, since Israel is concerned that Hamas leadership will smuggle itself as well as hostages out of the Gaza Strip through different tunnels that go between Gaza and Egypt. According to the report, Egypt insists that any future deployment along the line will include Palestinian forces and is reassuring Israel that it is in complete control of the border. The report in Al-Akhbar also stated that Israel is operating intelligence units in Sinai, Sudan, and Libya out of fear that hostages will be smuggled to there en route to areas like Iran or Lebanon. Regarding casualties, 1 IDF soldier is reported killed in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 184. 17 IDF soldiers were reported injured in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers that were injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began, 1,189. The Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting that 147 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians that were killed since the war began to 23,357. It is also reporting that 59,410 Palestinians are confirmed injured, and that there are still between 8,000 and 10,000 Palestinians, according to estimates, that are buried under the rubble in the Gaza Strip. Moving on to the humanitarian situation, the UN reported today that between January 1st and January 10th of this year, only 14% of planned food, medicines, and water supplies that were destined for the northern parts of the Gaza Strip were able to be delivered. According to reports, the planned routes were repeatedly closed, and hospitals and pharmacies in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip are in acute shortages of medical supplies. A total of 193 trucks entered the Gaza Strip today carrying food, water, and medical supplies. They entered both through the Rafah crossing and the Kerem Shalom crossing. Other news related to the humanitarian situation, Israel has officially begun to work against public opinion campaigns going around the world that Israel is starving the population in Gaza. According to reports that came out today, Israel is emphasizing that the many humanitarian avenues that it is operating in order to allow more food to come in. Israel claimed that as far as it is concerned, it could allow 300 to 400 aid trucks to enter the Gaza Strip each day, but the problems are the logistical problems on the UN side of Gaza, and that while conditions in the Gaza Strip are harsh, they are not conditions of starvation. In addition, according to a report in Al-Akhbar, Egypt requested that Israel open the Erez crossing, that is the crossing in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and expand the Kerem Shalom crossing, as Egypt would like to close the Rafah crossing to stop the aid flowing from there. However, Israel refused. Moving on to the West Bank, substantial IDF activity was reported in the Jenin refugee camp in the last 24 hours. There's very little reports regarding what actually came out of that operation or how many people were injured or arrested. Other news, in a National Security Council debate that occurred in Israel today, it was reported that 8,000 Palestinian workers from the West Bank are still working in Israel, 5,000 of them in the settlements in the West Bank and 3,000 in Israel itself. A plan was proposed to gradually increase this by 13,000. However, this is likely to have vast political resistance from the Israeli government. So I'll say a word about that. When October 7th happened, Israel canceled all the work permits of Palestinians from the West Bank that work in Israel. This is well upwards of 100,000 Palestinians who earn their wages in Israel. This caused a major economic crisis in the West Bank and also affected Israel's economy. Since then, there was a lot of pressure from Israel's economy to allow Palestinian workers back in, and there was also pressure from the security establishment saying that unemployment in the West Bank is the hotbed for radicalization. However, right-wing elements in Israel's cabinet always consistently refused to allow the expansion of Palestinian workers from the West Bank to come back into Israel. Right now, according to at least the National Security Council, there is a plan to start to gradually expand this. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. Like from Gaza, this is one of the quietest days. There was only one barrage of 3 rockets sent from Lebanon. This targeted the areas of Arab al-Ramsheh. Regarding the IDF activity, the IDF carried out retaliations against that barrage of rockets. However, there were also a series of initiated attacks that it carried out throughout the last 24 hours. Among others, it targeted the Hezbollah Operational Command near the Shuba village and launching sites in Anakura, and as well as the lookout post in El Yaham. There were also other IDF attacks reported in the villages of El Jabarin, Yarin, Tir Herfa, and Adahira. There was also other activity reported in Alavona. However, it was unclear if this was an IDF attack or an explosion from a rocket. What was reported is that an explosion occurred in the area. Other news, Hezbollah reportedly increased the security measures with its operatives out of fear of continued assassinations. In the last week, Israel severely amped up the assassinations, targeting both Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iranian activity throughout the north. Right now, Hezbollah reportedly is told its activists to stop speaking on phones, to stop reporting who's going where, out of fear of continued IDF assassinations. Other political news, Amos Hochstein, who is the special envoy of the United States to the Middle East, is due to arrive in Lebanon tomorrow, and he will meet with the Lebanese Prime Minister and the Speaker of the Parliament. This is very important. Hochstein visited Israel last week. He has a good history of negotiating deals between Lebanon and Israel. It was stated a few days ago that if he's invited back to Beirut, this is likely a good sign of a possible diplomatic breakthrough. Amidst this, the Deputy Speaker of the House in Lebanon, Elias Bosaab, stated today that enabling the return of civilians to the southern parts of Lebanon will be done diplomatically, and that war is not the answer. Other news related to the north, however, this time to Syria. The Syrian Human Rights Observatory stated that Hezbollah today deployed electronic and GPS jamming signals in the Deir Azur area in Syria out of fear of Israeli and U.S. attacks. This is important. The Deir Azur area is one of the areas that Iran moved 2 of its militias from Iraq into the area in order to strengthen Hezbollah, possibly attack Israel, attack different U.S. bases, and also facilitate the weapons smuggling from Iran through to Hezbollah. So the fact that Hezbollah is now deploying these jamming signals is likely out of this continued fear that Israel is amping up its retaliations in the northern parts of the country, specifically in Lebanon and Syria. Moving on to some of the regional developments, following the major attack of drones and missiles that the Houthis launched yesterday, today the Houthis claimed that these were aimed at U.S. and Israeli ships. The UN Security Council today adopted a resolution calling upon the Houthis to cease their hostilities, release kidnapped maritime workers, and recognizing the International Prosperity Guardian Force, that is this international coalition led by the United States. Amidst this, the U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby stated that the Houthis have a choice about their actions, and that they will bear the consequences if they continue the attacks. Houthi spokesperson stated in response that the passage through the Red and Arab Sea is safe, and that the U.S. is trying to arm the region in order to serve Israel's interests. He also added that the Houthis will continue their attacks against Israeli ships and ships that are bound for Israel until an end of the aggression and siege against Gaza. Moving on to some of the political and general trends that occurred, there was a meeting that occurred today between Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. After the meeting, Blinken stated, I'm quoting, "I don't want to speak for President Abbas, but I think that what I take away from this meeting is that he is committed to reforms." Washington also put out statements that it was a very productive meeting. However, Sky News in Arabic reported in turn that the meeting between Abbas and Blinken was extremely tense, and that responding to demands of reform, the Palestinian Authority chairman stated, I'm quoting, "You have to reform yourselves and your policies towards the Palestinian issue." The report included that Abbas asked Blinken to pressure Israel about the Palestinian Authority tax money that is being held by Israel, and emphasized that Gaza is an indispensable part of the Palestinian state. Other reports even included that the two sides exchanged slurs with each other, and that each one was accusing the other one of responsibility for the failures in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Ynet site reported from sources close to the Palestinian Authority leadership that the leadership is very concerned that the U.S. is working to replace it. AFP reported that Blinken told Abbas that the U.S. supports concrete steps towards the establishment of a Palestinian state. Moving on to the next major political development. The case of South Africa charging Israel with genocide is going to open in the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, tomorrow. So again, South Africa has charged Israel with committing acts of genocide in the Gaza Strip. It has brought forth a lot of evidence of Israel withholding back aid, stopping humanitarian aid, as well as statements by different government officials in Israel that are calling upon the country to randomly kill and annihilate all Palestinians and to decimate and burn Gaza to the ground. South Africa is requesting that the court execute an immediate injunction and demand that Israel stop its activities in the Gaza Strip while the case is heard, which will likely take years. The proceedings begin tomorrow. South Africa is going to present its case for 3 hours. On Friday, Israel is going to present its case, and then the court will rule if it will actually hand down an injunction or not. Amidst this, Prime Minister Netanyahu today put out a statement in social media, only in English, in which he stated, quoting, "I want to make a few points absolutely clear. Israel has no intention of permanently occupying Gaza or displacing its civilian population. Israel is fighting Hamas terrorists, not the Palestinian population, and we are doing so in full compliance with international law." He also listed the ways that the IDF tries to encourage Palestinians to evacuate different fighting areas and how Hamas in turn stops them. So clearly Netanyahu is putting out this statement leading up to the case, and in order to counter some of the statements that South Africa is bringing forth of different government ministers who are calling for the willful / encouraged / forced immigration of Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip. However, despite all the warnings from the Attorney General and different lawyers and different members of government that the inflammatory statements made by some members of government and some members of cabinet are being used as evidence against Israel, Netanyahu's statements came under heavy condemnation, specifically from the Likud party. Nissim Vaturi, who is a member of the Likud, repeated his previous statements today, stating, and I quote, I stand behind my words. It is better to burn buildings than have our soldiers hurt. There are no innocents in Gaza. We managed to do an orderly evacuation. There are 100,000 left in the north. Whoever is there, I have no pity on them. There are no innocents. Whoever is there has to be killed. And in another response, also from a Likud member, this time from a member of the Knesset, Tali Gottlieb, she stated that if Netanyahu does not realize that Israel needs to occupy Gaza and put settlements in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, then the credit he has from the Likud members is over. That is critically important because one of the things that is guiding Netanyahu is the fact that if Minister Gantz and his party leave the coalition, then his government is beholden to the different right-wing elements and the threats of members of the Likud themselves, saying if Netanyahu wavers on these ideas of possibly establishing settlements, then his support from the Likud may be over, is likely to be important later on. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.